Hey everybody, welcome back to TransPsyche. This topic we are both really excited for because this is the heart and soul of what TransPsyche is about, and is underlying pinnacle a juxtaposition? Is that like a contradiction? I don't know.
Maybe.
But it's the pinnacle and it's underlying, and it's one of the most important topics, which is transcendence itself. A very kind of fluid, sort of vague topic, because I just out of curiosity looked up what Google says is the definition of transcendence, and it says existence or experience beyond the normal or physical level. So that's pretty abstract, which is why we wanted to start breaking this down. So this is our kind of intro to transcendence 101. Except I'm sure we'll go to like 1,000 in a second. So these are some of the questions that we really want to explore. So number one, like, what is transcendence? You know, if we can try to explore what that means deeper according to psychology and our own lived experiences. And number two, how do you know if you're in a state of transcendence? How do you recognize it? And then a little bit about what is the opposite of transcendence. And that would be another discussion. But for now, we really want to focus on the basics of what transcendence means to us and other ways that you might be able to recognize it in your existence. So for me, my consensus is that transcendence, like most of proactive existing, is about creating meaning from chaos. And there's a couple philosophies that I've explored that have personally greatly helped me to move away from chaos and disorder and mental illness and sort of come out of a trauma state. So part of this involves moving away from an attitude or belief in nihilism. So a little bit about what nihilism is. Nihilism is a philosophical faith, I suppose, or theory. It's very complicated and there's lots of different opinions about it, but it's basically the belief that there is no inherent meaning to anything in the universe. There's no inherent truth or meaning. It's all filtered through a subjective lens and through the ego, and therefore nothing really matters. It's all chaos. Nothing really matters. There's no true meaning. So why really put effort into anything? If nothing matters at all in the span of billions of years, why do anything? So this is like a negativistic, pessimistic, and destructive attitude that you can take about the chaos of existence, which is something that I used to do quite a lot. And we can get into that in another episode. How, what is nihilism? How do you recognize when you're in a nihilistic state and things about the negative side of it? But what I really want to talk about is existentialism. Existentialism is another complicated philosophical school of thought, but existentialism basically agrees there is no inherent meaning either. There is no inherent meaning that we can define, and everything is subjective and still filtered through that subjective ego lens. However, there is a capacity to find meaning ourselves. There is a capacity to explore and create our own sense of meaning and purpose. So it has a more neutral view that can lean more positive. And it's really difficult to embrace that view, which is why I have broken it down a bit further in a philosophy that for me is extremely helpful, which is absurdism. Absurdism comes off of existentialism. Absurdism basically frames everything as chaos, and everything is inherently chaotic. We really don't understand what it is. There's no inherent meaning or purpose. And the concept of the absurd is where profound seeking of meaning, because humans are programmed, it seems, to seek meaning and try to discover it and find it and maintain it and create it. So we have this huge capacity for meaning. But when we seek this meaning, we then come into contact with the chaos. And the chaos can be extremely painful, extremely destructive, confusing. And so the concept of the absurd is where great forces of chaos meet great forces of meaning. And the painful, constant human struggle to reconcile with either one. Like the more chaotic something is, the more absurd it becomes. And you can see this in comedy a lot too, where pain meets meaning. So according to absurdist philosophy, there's three possible solutions that anyone could take to try and deal with the fact of this horrible state of absurdity where nothing really makes quite sense. We're looking for meaning, but it's so chaotic and painful. And sometimes we try to find intense meaning, but it ends up being just meaningfully horrible instead of what we were seeking. So there's three solutions to this. One, you can kill yourself. And I want to say that these are all three solutions that I've tried, or at least gotten really close to. So the first one is kill yourself. You can't deal with the chaos. It's too absurd. You can get a way out by killing yourself. But ironically, right, that would be probably the most absurd thing of all. It would create more absurdity, because if your life has the potential for meaning, and it has such great potential for meaning that you then destroy it, that would then become even more absurd than the absurdity of the rest of the world, hypothetically. So killing yourself is not really a good solution, right? The second solution is to believe in some kind of higher power, some kind of spiritual power, the universe, usually God, some type of God. And this is obviously better than killing yourself. And I think this is probably what most people do, or at least what most people used to do, is this was their solution. They had a set of beliefs. But the critique of this, of course, is that it limits your freedom, it limits your autonomy, it limits your possibility for other meaning making, because you have to ascribe to a certain doctrine. And of course, this is without even saying that of the doctrines that are, inherently flawed or corrupt or abusive or strict or, antisocial. But even any doctrine that you subscribe to, any belief system, so to speak, like that has rules and regulations, there's flaws to that, because it can limit your autonomy and limit your capacity for meaning and free will. So the third option is to not kill yourself, stay alive, face the absurdity, and also reject any preconceived script for living your life. So that means basically creating your own meaning, which is really the hardest thing to do, because of so many different variables that you come into play with. But this is what I've come to embrace, is you can. No, so first of all, there is no inherent meaning that we're aware of, but you do have the capacity to do it. You do have the capacity to seek meaning. But when you seek meaning, you can't necessarily seek it in a god or a godlike figure. And I want to add on to the second solution, as in, it doesn't even have to be like a god per se. Like I have never been, I've been an atheist since I was 14. I've wanted to believe in God because I was so suicidal. I didn't want to kill myself, right? So I was trying to get to the second solution without really knowing of these solutions, of course. But what I did was actually kind of elevate other human beings to godlike status. So I would, usually like romantic interests or even celebrities or whoever, I would follow them. But then, of course, very absurdly, they would always disappoint me, and then it would be insane chaos and destruction. So you can't necessarily put your faith in another person to provide you that relief, that foundational structure. And if you do, and it is positive, it could still limit you in various ways. So in the past couple years, something that's really helped me is realizing the concept of the absurd, realizing that everything is chaos. I'm right. I'm totally right instinctually. Like everything is fucking weird, right? It's very bizarre. It's very trippy. It's very insane. So it is chaos. But within chaos, you can find certain grooves, as I call them, right? You can get on a good wave, you can get in a good flow, and you're able to create some order out of the chaos. Because if you try to fight it too much, it's going to drive you insane. And you're not going to be able to function, and yourself you're going to become absurd yourself. So, existentialism, it's a very difficult thing. It takes a lifetime of continual acceptance, basically. And I also, at some point, want to get into the concept of radical acceptance and how that's related to the concept of ordering the chaos. But Vincent, do you want to say something about it so far? Because I just said a lot of kind of stuff there.
Yeah, well, I was enjoying that, actually. So I'll admit some of these things I haven't delved into too deeply, but I'm very aware of the nihilism and existentialism arguments. The absurdism I'm not really familiar with, but your explanation makes total sense. And I think what's I can't help myself picking up is there's this attempt for us to try and make sense of meaning. Okay, so I think you used the word a couple of times now, just in the last 10 minutes or so. But it's interesting that there seems to be a struggle between what we're born into and what we then go on to create. So there's two conditions. You're born into this condition, and what is that? And then you go and create something, So now I'm going to throw in here, because just as something for people to sort of root your thinking in when we talk about, because I think we're going to do a couple of episodes on transcendence, because it just seems to be, for Laura and I, it seems to be a real catch-all, and not a lazy catch-all, clearly, but it's a catch-all phrase which helps us focus our attention on what's happening with all these topics, all these the contemporary topics that Laura and I like to talk about, whether it's gender, or whether it's politics, or whether it's being woke, or race essentialism, etc., etc. This all comes back to, and it's very well supported in psychology, of whether you understand your place in existence, okay, in this reality. Okay, so I'm just going to root it in one thing for us, is that this idea that you're born into a condition. And I would say, based on a lot of stuff that I've read, that we are actually a meaning-making species. Okay, so let's just start at zero. You pop out and everything's very bright. There's people slapping you and sticking tubes down your throat and God knows what else. And your mind is instantly going, oh my God, what is going on? Okay, and I know that's all very comical, but that is actually what's happening. Your brain is instantly using innate abilities that we have when we're born, because many mammals are born, even insects, I think, are born with certain innate abilities. Okay, I don't think anybody's going to argue that point. And what ours are driven to establish is meaning, ultimately. Okay, if you look at all of human history, the thing that drives us the most, that animates us the most, is meaning, purpose, alternating with purpose and meaning. And of course, depending on all sorts of other factors, economic factors, and the relationships between the sexes and all these other things. But anyway, the point being that we are a meaning-making species. So I think we must just understand that what we're talking about here is very much the essence of how you live your day-to-day life. So then I'm just going to add one other little thing that Laura said, and I know Laura and I don't mind disagreeing with each other, so it's not that I'm disagreeing with you, Laura, but I'm just going to nitpick one thing you said, that you said there's no inherent meaning, or you said maybe there is no inherent meaning. I know you like leaving the doors open, so I respect that. So I think that the problem with the positive nihilism that you see in, for example, the Nazis, that's a proactive, that's a positive nihilism. They introduce nihilism into the world. Is that it is predicated on this idea that there's no inherent meaning. So the reason why I'm talking about our zero moment in life and how we're innately equipped with the abilities to find meaning or to create meaning if necessary, is my point is, it depends how you look at your species. If you acknowledge that your species, that you're part of the human species and you are a meaning-making machine, you would never adopt positive nihilism. So I just want to give us those two sort of maybe extreme points, and everything else we're discussing in between, which is negative nihilism, which is just someone who doesn't believe in anything. Is kind of the I don't want to disparage my old club, the new nihilists, but the nihilists, many atheists have that perception that oh well, we must just make the most of it today, and then on the other hand, you have the positive nihilists who think we actually need to bring that level of chaos because the only thing that matters is survival. They go to the opposite extreme. So ultimately, my point is a lot of what we're talking about, I think, is a denial of our evolutionary processes that we are born with, and that no matter what you do, you cannot escape. So I'll let you carry on from there. I'm sorry if I broadened it way further than you hoped.
No, that's about where I am at. So I do want to say, I don't fully ascribe to really anything except funk. I don't fully ascribe to existentialist thought, or because I'm like I think we've discussed, I'm also skeptical that there is no inherent meaning. And by inherent meaning, I guess that's a little hard to it's impossible to quantify what inherent meaning is. That's what it's more about. There's definitely meaning. It's just that meaning is filtered through a subjective lens. It's different perceptions, different neurons, different beliefs and experiences, and the ego and all that. So that's what's more meant by inherent meaning. And also there's a paradox where on some level I'm tempted to say everything is actually meaningful. Every single thing has the potential to be infinitely meaningful or infinitely meaningless, but it depends on how you're looking at it. And if you're looking at one human life in the scope of the entire universe, it's very easy or tempting to think well, that is meaningless, right? We're going to be stardust. That's meaningless. Or, is it though? I would say rather it's meaningful. Every single thing is meaningful, but you can't quantify how meaningful it is. How meaningful it actually is, its inherent worth or value would be subjective. So I think that's more to the point of what I was saying about the acceptance, because I found acceptance to be a gray area. It's a gray space. If positivity is white, let's say, and negativity is black, acceptance is where you can get from negativity to positivity in the middle. So what I mean by this is I just found that I absolutely despised how I kept being I kept experiencing messages or people telling me in like pop psychology ways, like, you just need to love yourself. You just need to think positively. You just need to let it go, blah, blah, blah. Like, yeah, I know. And I hated that. And I was like, that's not realistic, and it made me push against those ideas of what they could represent even more. But what I personally found was that you can't, for example, if you deeply, deeply hate yourself and your life, you can't just go from hating yourself in your life to loving yourself in your life. Okay. That would be actually irrational. So what you can do is you can meet somewhere in the middle in this gray zone. And that is known as radical acceptance. And radical acceptance is saying, this is just happening. It just is. Therefore it is. You don't put a value judgment on it. You don't qualify it with anything. You say, okay, I am, and obviously you can break it down into smaller parts. Like, let's say you hate yourself for being overweight or just something like that. Like, okay, I'm overweight. I am overweight. It's just what it is. You don't have to say, oh, I'm overweight. You know what? That's totally fine. You know what? There's no problems with being obese at all, right? That's like toxic positivity and placation and manipulation and self-delusion, right? But you also don't want to say, well, I'm fat and therefore my life is meaningless and I should kill myself and it means I'm a bad person. And, you can't have either of those extremes. But if you just say, I exist and that's okay, like, I suppose that would be qualifying it, but that's like giving yourself permission to just be. And that's what radical acceptance is, giving yourself permission to just be as you are right now. And once you get to that place of neutrality, your emotions can level out. You can get a bit more rational. And then you can decide what steps to take after that point. But I've kind of found in the chain of meaning making, at least for self, because that's where I've struggled, what's where we all struggle. Like, you have to go from mindfulness. So you start with mindfulness. You start with awareness. So you say, I am aware that I exist. I'm aware of this problem or whatever it is. I'm aware of it. Now I accept it. Okay. I say, all right, it is happening. And you know what? It's okay. It's just what it is. I'm not going to try to do anything about it right now. Then you have to go to a place of forgiveness. So you accept it. Then you forgive yourself for it or forgive whatever it is. And by forgive, I kind of mean like soften your attitude towards it. Stop trying to control it. Stop trying to change it. Stop trying to manipulate it or think about how it could be something else or how something else should have happened. So for the self metaphor, it's like, okay, I don't like the way I look. And, maybe, I'd be tempted to go into all of the mistakes I made, about all the poor choices I made to why I have the appearance that I have today or whatever. So you're aware of it. You accept, okay, I am like this. Then you forgive yourself and you say, you know what, like, it's all right. It's all right that I have made these mistakes because I am, a flawed creature. Inherently, everything is flawed mechanism. Inherently, nothing is perfect at all. There's no perfect structure to anything in the entire universe. And it has the capacity for destruction or self-destruction. So once you go from forgiveness, then you can go to respect. So you can kind of start to see like, okay, maybe I can respect the fact that I'm a whole person and different things. And then from respect, you go to love. So that's why it took me so long to kind of embrace like a positive attitude that wasn't so nihilistic, because it just, I couldn't fathom cognitively or emotionally or practically making a leap from self-hate to self-love. Like that was just way too far to go. So I realized like acceptance. And once I realized that acceptance was the key to kind of unlocking some self-hate stuff and some other things, I realized that acceptance was the thing that universally could drive more powerful existential forces, because this is what absurdist philosophy, this is why I like absurdist philosophy so much, is because it really doesn't shy away at all from the fact that everything is like an insane clown world. It embraces the fact that it's an insane clown world, and we're all insane clowns, and we're fucking insane clowns, and some of them are more insane than others. But, you know, everything is chaos, and it embraces that, because if you lean into the chaos, which is one of my favorite kind of concepts, leaning into the chaos, leaning into the absurdity, you will learn so much, and you will be able to build resiliency to the chaos. That's not saying like, oh, you know, just cause chaos and mayhem for no reason, right? That's, you know, there's a thin line between like play and like actual destruction, right? But there is a line. But you can build tolerance to the chaos, because you cannot spend your whole life avoiding it. You won't be able to avoid chaos for 1 second. Well, maybe you can avoid it for 1 second, but the next second, like, some really crazy stuff's going to happen. So you have to be prepared for chaos, because chaos is always happening. So you have to be aware of it, and you have to acknowledge it and befriend it. You befriend the chaos. That's what I think of absurdism as, like befriending that insane clown. Like, you know what? I'm going to learn what makes that clown tick so that I can interact with the clown more safely and healthily. And then I can embrace the clown in myself, and I can act healthily and safely towards other clowns. So that's where I'm at mentally all the time.
Can I say, just at that point, that's so interesting, because we've spoken about this a couple of times, and I've just realized something while you were talking there, that, I mean, I know we've spoken about radical acceptance therapy. So there's a psychological basis to this that has been researched and we know works. But what's interesting, if we just take it up a level, could I say, I wonder what you think of this. Could you say that radical acceptance of yourself, of your chaos, of your yourself, your full self, I mean, your weaknesses, your flaws, your body, your parents, your culture, even. Okay, I mean, I'm when I say acceptance, I don't mean, I mean what you mean. I don't mean just look in the mirror and go, oh, I'm okay, I'm not so bad. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about where you look at yourself holistically and you go, okay, this is what I've been given. Okay. And it's this powerful moment where I'm going to say is actually the absence of ideology. It's the complete absence of ideology, because I feel like when you were talking there, I saw myself in two different stages of my life where when I was very young and I realized that I didn't want to believe in the traditional Catholic Christian system, the structure of a Catholic system. I found I realized very young that it was predicated on fear, and that put me off. As soon as I made that realization, it put me off completely. But I realized I had to go away, and when I walked out of the church that day, because I was actually in the church when this happened, I suddenly realized I had this absence of ideology. And at the age of 11, I was like, oh my God, well then, excuse the pun, what do I believe in then? And this is and it's funny because when I was 13, as I've mentioned before, I almost committed suicide. And that was a similar moment where I was like, okay, well, what do I believe in then? So you see, it's this recurring question. And then years later, around 24, I had a major crisis. And again, it was like, the question was, okay, well, I've realized this one paradigm of beliefs that I had crumbled in my hands, and I'm left with nothing. And I look at my hands and I go, wow, what do I believe in again? So I think it's very much a part of our journey. And it does go back to what I was saying earlier about the meaning-making species. But then I just want to throw in another thing that, I had a very, very good, he was actually a psychiatrist, but he was also a philosopher, lecturer at my college. And he was just so deep. I mean, I could talk hours with this guy. He was just so knowledgeable about the human condition, basically. And he brought up the fact that a lot of the answers to the human condition are in physics, actually, because physics provides the study of matter and reality of existence. And in that study, they've come up with chaos theory, which is essentially, sounds to me like it's very similar to the absurdism construct, that you accept the fact that there is chaos. You accept the fact that in the absence of any ideology, you're not left with void, you're left with chaos. Actually, it's a different thing. What do you think of that?
I mean, I agree. I think we'd have to try to define what the void is, because the void isn't the absence of, the void, you're not left alone with nothing. The void is not nothing. The void is everything. The void is everything all the time, chaos. But it feels like a void. It feels empty because it's a lack of meaning, of sense making about that chaos, right? I agree about the physics too. And so I was going to mention, like, it's about reactions. Everything is just a chemical reaction to everything else. So that's why it's hard to say, is anything really inherently meaningful? Or how much can you even... One question that I want to explore is, like, how do you know if something is meaningful? Like, what is meaning itself, right? How do you know if it's meaningful? To me, it feels like it's an instinctual thing. You know if something's meaningful if you're motivated to pursue it. And I want to say also that meaning isn't just some positive, happy, blissful thing. Like, you can find a lot of meaning in the depths of pain. Okay, that's what I like to do. I like to excavate graves, metaphorically, and find mening in those bones.
I was going to say.
And then turn the bones. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I turned the bones into my own funky skeletons and put them around my house. And so my skeletons are all out in the open. They're not in the closet. And if they were, I would go in the closet and sit with them and look at them, because I want to find the meaning that they have. Yeah. And so which is really, it's a scary thing. And people have told me, like, Laura, I really don't have time for that. Like, that is too intense. It's too much. Like, really. And I'm just like, well, I just want to know what the truth is. I want to know what meaning there is. And that's why I do have a love-hate relationship with the idea of rumination and people telling me constantly, like, stop thinking about it. You really need to stop thinking about it so much. And really, are you learning anything? And I'm just like, well, maybe I think about it, like, I think about the same thing like 5 times. I definitely learn something new every single time. And it's painful as hell, but I do learn stuff. And it's like, okay, maybe there's easier ways to learn about something, but it's like you return to it for different reasons. And part of it is because it was meaningful. And that's where the absurd again comes in, because it isn't that thing was just so chaotically painful and traumatic. Because it wouldn't be traumatic, right, if it didn't imply something very vast and deep. So I guess meaning doesn't have to be just positive, but we are also using it to imply something that has value. And I guess value doesn't have to be, it could have a positive or negative value too, right? Like, how horrible is something? How amazing is something? How beautiful is something? How ugly is something, right? I feel like that's my job as an artist, to Just think about it.
Let me say, wow, that's some brilliant stuff there. I hope everyone listening is like appreciative of there's so many things we could say about Laura in the closet with a skeleton. It's just brilliant. So I just want to savor that moment. And yeah, Laura's holding up her skeleton as we speak with,
this is Mr. Bone Jangles.
And what is that necklace?
It's just some rainbow fruity like bouquet necklace that he's wearing. Yeah, Mr. Bone Jangles. He's my friend.
Brilliant. Well,
I have many skeletons.
I must tell you, like, again, this simpatico vibe that you and I have is just so awesome, because one of the big turning points in my life was reading a guy called Leo Buscaglia. I think his books are still available. I suspect he's passed away by now, but I read these books probably 30 years ago. And he was this guy, I might have mentioned him before, but he was this guy who actually literally went to Tibet and spent some time in Tibet trying to find himself till, I don't know the exact story, but it was something like one of the monks literally said to him, you know, yourself is within yourself. It's not here. And it just dawned on him that he was at the wrong place and he needed to go back home to New York and find himself there. And he ended up becoming a lecturer who had a module, who did a course on love, literally on love. And it was very popular, apparently. And he wrote a couple of books. And one of the things that he said in this book that I have was when he came back from Tibet, he started this habit of, he actually bought the plot of land that his grave would be on. And he would go regularly to the site with a chair and a book. And he would sit on his grave and read a book. And when I read this, I think I had to read it. I think I actually did end up reading this book 4 or 5 times over the years because it was just such a beautiful book and so positive. But that particular part just struck me as this grounding effect of, you know, again, of the there is a level of nihilism in our lives because on the one hand, we're such a useless species, but on the other hand, we're such a destructive species. And then in the other corner, we've got this incredible ability to create beauty and music and go to the moon and all these other incredible things, you know. So I think, you know, Laura, when I hear you speak about your journey, and what I like about our discussions is, you know, my journey is ongoing, but your journey is quite fresh in your mind. And I love how you capture it so eloquently, if you don't mind me saying. I mean, obviously, I'm doing a podcast with you, so there must be something in it. But that how you can put it into words, that the struggle is real. You know, this phrase that people use so flippantly. But at the end of the day, we know that growth is painful. Okay, in the physical world and in the mental world. Okay, we know that we need to be anti-fragile. We know that we need to be resilient. So ergo, the finding meaning in life, which is what we're driven to do, I believe, is going to be a difficult and sometimes dark process, you know, because in that process, if you're not confronting death and nihilism and, you know, you're like, even on a very basic level, your utility in the world, what is the point of me being here? If you're not confronting that, I'm sorry, I don't think you're actually doing the work, you know, to get to this point where you can really see the nuance of life, the themes in relationships and in what growth really is. Do you know what I mean? So I think that your little comment there was, it sounds so casual, you know, but confronting the skeleton and confronting the base structure of your being. You know, are you just a skeleton, or are you this amazing creature who gets to ruminate on their own existence? I mean, it's just an absolutely mind-blowing idea if you think about it, really.
Right. I mean, I'm not just a skeleton. I'm also like a circulatory system of nerves too. So it's all about the connections and the chemical reactions of those connections. And that can be applied infinitely to socio-political, cultural, familial, everything, every type of relationship. It's just a connection. And so I think pivoting off of that, I also wanted to discuss something that's crucial to this idea. So it's like, okay, so, right, if we're doing the third option of we have to create our own meaning, okay, where do we even start with that, right? I have found in journey from someone who was suicidal and hopeless and had learned helplessness and all of these things, which again, we'll get into in another episode if you want to hear the dirty details of all that. But, you know, we'll dig up a grave and get kind of dirty in the soil for that one.
I can't wait.
Yeah. Well, you heard it before, Vincent, but this will be for the public. But what I wanted to discuss was the idea of the how do you even start to have purpose? Because if you feel helpless or overwhelmed, what is the thing that at the core is going to help you achieve anything? And this is what I've realized from years of inactivity and not doing anything and being like, oh, wait a second, actually. And this is what it is. It's the internal locus of control, being in charge of your own destiny, acknowledging that you have some power and you actually have quite a bit of power. You have autonomy in your own destiny, despite the forces of nature and chaos. And some people try to sort of have this internal locus of control they try to mimic this control by exerting like authoritarian means, authoritarianism, or excessive control of force and domination and abuse, or even like grandiose narcissism would be an example, or anarchy, creating more chaos. But the real thing is an internal locus of control, which means that you view yourself as a being that has meaning and the ability to create meaning, and not just a little meaning, but infinite meaning. And then if you want to apply it further, having true empathy would recognize that everyone else is also autonomous and they also have the potential to create their own meaning. And not just the potential, but they actually, or the right, or the choice, but actually the duty, the responsibility. I know I'm sounding like Jordan Peterson right now a little bit, but they have the responsibility to take control of their potential to create meaning and recognize that everyone else does too. And then, of course, optimally, we would try to cooperate with each other, which is where most of our human problems come from, is the misinterpretation of meaning, our own meaning and someone else's meaning, and then the joint meaning. It's all very absurd. But the internal locus of control, once you start to establish that, and we'll discuss how do you achieve an internal locus of control and start to do that in depth in another episode. But part of that is, like I said about that self-acceptance. You know, if you want to achieve a sense of autonomy, you have to first recognize that you have the capacity for all of these different emotions, every single different emotion, all these different thoughts, the darkest and most disgusting thoughts imaginable, and the most disgusting and darkest actions and behaviors imaginable. It's all in there somewhere in the DNA, evolutionary wise. So you make a deliberate and intentional choice to give yourself permission to explore what you really want to do, or what you somehow know is the right thing to do, right? The thing that you have felt guilt and shame about not doing. And again, we can get more into that in another episode. But Vincent, do you have any thoughts about the internal locus of control?
I have thoughts. I have a lot of thoughts. Because first of all, that internal locus of control, being in charge and having autonomy of your own destiny, despite the forces of nature and chaos, is actually a really powerful sentence, because there's so much in that, and getting to that point is not easy. It doesn't come naturally. And again, I'll give an example of my own life. That my instinct has always been to be creative. In the darkest moments of my life, I felt this overwhelming urge to create drawings, art, whatever it was, But there was a moment in my mid-20s where on my own, I suppose, you're always influenced by stuff you read and stuff you watch and whatever, but on my own, the one very early morning in a moment of chaos, exactly, to use the language we're using in this episode, to me, it looked like a big switch, and it was off was chaos and on was create. And I've just had this ability to see things in these moments of chaos, as very clear. Like, you need to switch on the switch, because my instinct is that nothing bad can come from being creative. Okay. Because that's, I believe, is our, whether it's to create other human beings or to create art or to create something, we are innately a creative species. Those of us that can see that. Okay, so unfortunately, your point is very accurate, that at the end of the day, many people don't see this, and they might go their whole lives without seeing this. Although I think most people see it at some point, but there is, I think, a lot of the conflict in our world has to do with, and even in our families, has to do with the differences. And this is why this shift transcends ages. This is why often I mention that I don't think transcendence has a lot to do with age. It's got a correlation with age, but not always. You can have very young people that are transcending, and then you have people that are old who just have never transcended, maybe because they never had the opportunity. So it's not I'm not really making a value judgment on those people, but certainly you can tell the people that have recognized their ability to create something good, and they pursue that ability. And whereas other people are just reactive to the forces around them, so they look like they're succeeding, and in reality, what they're doing is they're honing possibly dark triad personality traits, the Machiavellian stuff that we see in so many people. And I have to say, I sometimes wonder if a lot of those people are not actually Machiavellian. They weren't born with dark triad traits. They have learned them from their environment, because actually, if you're Machiavellian in the modern world, you'll be successful. That's the sad truth about our reality. I just want to mention one other thing and we can bring it up again later, but we definitely have to talk about guilt and shame, because there's a lot of research into how guilt and shame drives us, and drives our behavior. So it's not something that you can just say, well, you should have some guilt and shame. No, you really, really should.
Right. So what I wanted to just put over what you just said was the for people who don't know, that would be called an external locus of control, when you're being reactive to everything and you are not coming from an internal sort of wholeness. You're reacting to everything. And I was going to say, I think part of the Machiavellian traits are from a lack of a sense of autonomy, a feeling of helplessness. Because if I think back, and I think if most people think back, what feelings would be there, like at the times when you did things that you felt shame and guilt about, the things that were destructive, the times when you were hurtful or abusive or chaotic, what were the driving factors of that, right? For me, it's usually a profound feeling of helplessness, a profound feeling of hopelessness, and feeling powerless, right? I felt like I could not control my own destiny, and I submitted to the chaos in a very nihilistic way. I didn't go flow with the chaos and say, or like go with the flow would be kind of the quote. Like I didn't go with it and was like, okay, let's see where this chaos takes me. Like I will try to kind of stay above the waves, like on a raft above the waves. Instead, I just let myself get tossed around in there, starting to drown. And that's when I lashed out and did anything desperately to try and regain a sense of power. And it's not that I really cared to have like sadistic, cruel power over others. I never was motivated by that. I was trying to overcompensate by the fact that I didn't feel a sense of internal regulation and control of my self or situation or emotions.
Well, I'm going to add in almost the same thing, but in slightly different words. I think I'm kind of summarizing what you've been saying for the last few minutes. But if you don't recognize that you do have power, that you can influence the world around you, then it's very easy to say, I'll just react. So this is why my instinct, and it sounds a bit judgmental, but this is why my instinct is to say to some people who are constantly reacting, that have that external locus of control, they are sometimes being lazy, because I'm very suspicious of people who have all the privileges, all the resources, all the abilities to understand the world better, are choosing not to see things. So there's this cognitive dissonance that they, for example, I'll give you a very topical example, Laura, which I don't know if you saw I mentioned today on my Twitter, but Whoopi Goldberg. I'm not going to say too much about Whoopi Goldberg because I'm not American and I don't want to insert myself into the American culture war directly, but I will say something from Africa. Okay. The Germans committed genocide on the Namibian tribe, the Herero people, in 1904. Okay. They killed probably close to 100,000 of this one tribe. There's several tribes in Namibia. They went after them with the explicit instructions from the Kaiser in Germany to exterminate the Herero people. All right. Now, there's a complicated background to this, which is not relevant to my point. My point being that Whoopi's comments this last week that basically the Germans the Nazis exterminating the Jews in the concentration camps was kind of a white issue. Okay. And a lot of people were offended by that. And I would like to add that there's an element to this that has been completely ignored, that if the Germans had had their way and got slightly more power, there's a couple of very small events that if they'd gone their way, the Germans would have controlled the entire southern African region. There's a small deal that was going to be done between the British and the Germans just before World War I broke out, which World War I prevented. Otherwise, the colonies, the Portuguese and the British colonies would have signed over Southern Africa to Mozambique, South Africa, and Namibia to the Germans, all right, you would have had a massive German state in Africa, all right, and they had no empathy for the tribes of Africa. So I just want to point out that when you have this kind of lazy heuristic that Whoopi demonstrated in that statement, and if you watch her when she says it, you can see that she's being lazy because she's not even taking a second to consider all the possible implications of saying something like, well, whites killing whites is not a race war, all right? When at the same time, they were, well, not at the same time, but in the same era, they were in Africa literally committing genocide intentionally, okay? So what upset me terribly about that was that no one's picked up on this, the Herero genocide committed by the Germans, which was horrific and deliberate against people who were essentially armed with bows and arrows at the time. They were very nomadic tribe, and certainly the men were warriors, but they were completely outgunned. It was a very bad time in terms of, power structures. So sorry, I'm going a lot into history here, but my point I'm making is that, do you see what I mean about you can make the excuse you didn't know, but at some point at a level of society where you've got access to information, you've got access to books, you've got access to the internet, I mean, you just don't have an excuse to have a nihilistic view and have this, what I believe what Whoopi did is a good example of someone who was expressing an opinion due to an external locus of control. She was feeling like she had to defend the idea of the pure binary race behavior of whites on blacks, and she forgot that there's a lot of nuance in that discussion. So I don't want to start a whole new controversy, but essentially what I see there is a lazy heuristic at play where someone hasn't actually grappled with their internal locus of control and how they can affect their community and their society positively.
And why do you think that is? Why do you think that? Do you think it's just a matter of you reach a certain level and you just say, I don't need any more than this. My needs are already met. So why should I have to continue to seek meaning?
Yeah, well,
or do you think it's something else?
You see, this is the problem with the consumerist culture that we have. By all intents and purposes, Whoopi Goldberg has everything already. So she has absolutely no, I'm speaking about at this point. Okay, I don't know Whoopi's whole life, and I'm sure she's had her own existential crises and things. So I'm not talking about her entire life, but I'm afraid ultimately we are judged. At very least, you're judged on the last 5 years of your behavior when you're a public figure like that. So I think what we're seeing with a lot of Hollywood and a lot of stars, a lot of people with a huge platform, is that a lot of their behavior is from an external locus of control, because it lacks that anti-nihilism thread that those of us that are still pursuing transcendence, and those of us that have made that distinction that transcendence must come from within, that we'll be creative for the sake of being creative, not for the sake of having a reward at the end of the day. Whereas every single thing that someone like, anyone on The View says is paid for. It's paid for.
Right. I just wanted to say, dude, creativity is itself the reward. You're not looking for another reward. This is what transcendence is, right? It's the pursuit of meaning. It's that idea truly that the journey is the destination. So when you are making the painting, that's the transcendence, not when you are done with the painting and you hang it up in a gallery and you get paid. I mean, that's great too. And that can lead to other things, right? Other meaningful things. It's not like that has to be like making money or capitalism is always inherently nihilistic. That's not true either. But it's the making of the painting for its own sake. And even better, if you are making this painting for its own sake, but also layered with doing it for a common good too. Like if you're painting a community mural, this is like, I'm studying community art, doing a certificate in it and doing my thesis in it. And one big thing about community art is it's not about the skill of the art. It's really about the experience of communal gathering over a shared creative activity that should benefit the community in some way. You're not getting any reward for that. You're not getting any money for that. You know,
that's beautiful.
You might get a little bit of press attention, but it's really the act of coming together to create meaning. And it's the coming together that's the meaning. And then you utilize everyone's energy within that space of a positive, good faith connection and empathy. And then it creates this beautiful meaning that is then displayed as a mural or a sculpture or even certain events that only last a day, you know, that never have any, like, what do they call that? I don't know what they call it. When you make a sculpture and then it's temporary.
It doesn't have a payoff. It doesn't have a payday.
Well, no, but I mean, like, they literally just put it up. It's like a temporary installation. Yeah. It's installation art. It's temporary. You know, it's not going to permanently stay up forever. It'll eventually deteriorate or whatever it is. But it's about the experience itself and then the memories of that experience, which lead to feelings that are anti-shame, anti-guilt, you know. You remember something positively, you know you did something good. So I guess that's what meaning is. So it's really hard to quantify what meaning is, but you do know it when it's happening. And I don't understand like the
but think about
chemistry of that.
Think about this is such an interesting thing. You know, there's a guy who passed away last year called Roger Scruton from the UK. And he's got some very conservative views, but the one thing that he did, which I appreciate, that he did focus on a lot was the restoration and the pursuit of beauty. Okay. And he writes and speaks about this a lot. Luckily he did a lot of interviews and stuff, but what he, very eloquently, pictures for us is when you're walking down the road, and the center of Johannesburg has this. The Johannesburg Center in South Africa is a almost dystopian place. Okay, it's quite a dangerous city. Okay, it's one of the most dangerous places in the world. In fact, that's not actually at war. But in that environment, I can tell you that the council still saw fit to have wooden carvings placed along certain streets and in certain corners, okay, that are bolted into the ground and hopefully won't be stolen. But why I appreciated that so much is because in this dystopian industrial Soviet era style city that's just concrete and fumes and gray mostly, you know, he has this statue. You'll be like standing at a traffic light and you'll look down and you'll suddenly realize there's this carving next to you. And in that carving, for a moment, your mind goes, oh my God, someone did that. All right, he was probably paid, but I'm sure he wasn't paid much. But someone did that because he honed his skills. He used hundreds of years of cultural and traditional influence to create this piece of work. So when you look at this one head of wood, it's not just a head of wood. It says all these other things about who you are, where you are, what you are, and ultimately what your purpose is. Because we might all be in the center of Johannesburg running around trying to you know, advance our careers or whatever it is. But those things have to be there to remind you that you're part of something bigger. And the irony is, when someone does become very successful, what's the first thing they do? They go and they buy art because they want to bring that into their lives, you know. So you can pursue success and money and, you know, the latest glass building some wealthy people live in these air-conditioned glass buildings, but they can't escape the fact that they'll go and they'll pursue a carving from the middle of Africa to bring some meaning into their lives. But my 2 points that I'm making with that is, when you look at a piece of art, it tells you where you are, who you are, and what you are. But it also tells you that there's other people out there that are pursuing this goal of craftsmanship.
Yeah, and it also shows you where you could go. You could be doing that, right? That's where the idea of, jealousy comes in. And I used to have a lot more of this, right? As a starting out artist who's very insecure, like, about everything. But one of my professors said, like, instead of looking at someone's work that you are so jealous of and thinking like, look at it as a point of inspiration. Like, look at how beautiful they made that. And that's how it's taken me, a few years to dim it down. But now when I see someone's art, yes, the ego. So when I first see someone's art, it happened to me today in class, I immediately was like, that's so cool. I wish I could do that. But then I didn't go into the automatic past reaction, which was like, but I can't do it. And like, well, is their stuff even that good? Or come on, like, whatever, Instead, I was like, no, like, good for them. Like, they did that. And I also do stuff that's also really good. And it's just amazing that we both do stuff. And I just love seeing their work, and I love seeing my work. And, it's just taken a few years to get to that point. But a big part of that is not only dissolving my ego and having more empathy for other people, but it's also recognizing, like I said, my own autonomy and honing my craft and realizing that if I actually put just like a little bit more effort into something, it can turn out like 20 times better. Like, I don't have a specific ratio for that mathematically, but, I used to be extremely lazy. Because I could just get by on natural intelligence or whatever. But I was really sloppy in my work. I was very not conscientious. And now I've recognized if I just am a little more patient, take a little more time, and realize that I can get through it, like, be patient with myself, be patient with the process itself. And then metaphorically, that could be applied to life itself. Like, be a little more patient with the chaos. Stop trying to fight the chaos. Don't, like, slam the computer down because you can't get some goddamn thing in Photoshop to work every single time. Don't, just shut it down or close off or exit the program or whatever it is. Like, just take a moment and rest and recognize that you can figure it out. And what I've realized, and I am going to write an essay on this. I wrote an essay on Twitter, but I'm going to make it into like a real essay. It's about competency. And because I was saying, like, how do you build that internal locus of control? It is becoming competent in something and feeling, that you can be competent in something. And that starts with, at the very basic level, doing the most basic thing that you feel you can manage, and then pushing yourself a little bit more. And when you push yourself enough, you realize that, I'm capable of that. Well, maybe I'm capable of this. And for me, that actually means literally like, okay, I'm capable of taking a shower every day. I do that for like a year or whatever. Then I'm like, well, maybe I'm capable of like brushing my teeth every day and taking a shower every day. And now I'm to the point, no, I'm not, it's very literal. It's very absurd, right? So now I'm to the point where I can shower every day, brush my teeth every day, cook dinner every day, do classes, work, 2 internships, do this and that, and talk to my skeletons. So I have really built up my competency in general. And so the internal locus of control is a constant feedback loop. And this is what I really want to emphasize is, how do you know if you're in a state of transcendence? It's when what you're doing feels right and it seems to be paying off and it seems to be interconnected to everything else around you too. And it feels cohesive. It feels like it's in harmony, like everything is vibrating together in harmony. So, I buy, let's say I go to the store and I buy a plate, and then I bring that plate in and I wash that plate. I put a bit of effort into it, right? I wash the plate, clean it off, then I stack it up with all my other plates. And then I am busy like doing classes all day and I'm starving, but I've been working really hard, so I didn't even care. Then I'm like, oh, I'm hungry. And then I knew that I had that plate in there exactly clean, right, when I needed it. And I take that plate out and it's this funky ass weird plate. And I'm like, I did that. Like I found that, and it's like every single thing you do is like a little dot on a map, and every single dot can be connected together. And when you zoom out and look at it, it's like a picture of your DNA almost, like your whole life. You see, and you're just like, and that it's just insane when that happens. But if you can really get to that state when you're really on that right path of transcendence, and you keep doing like all these other transcendent activities, it's all just cohesive, then you get to recognize when something isn't cohesive, and you'll feel it, because you'll feel guilt and shame about it. Like the other day, I was having just one of my routine breakdowns, and I really didn't want to go to this internship. It was an internship orientation. I knew I had to go to it. Extremely important, extremely meaningful. But I was a mess. I was like tired, really tired. I was like falling asleep because I was lying in my bed. This is my safe place. But I was falling asleep. I was crying. I was having a breakdown. And I was just like, what if I just didn't go? Like, what's the worst that could happen? Like, really, does it matter? And I noticed I was slipping into like my old thinking. And I was like, this is what I would do in the past. I just wouldn't go to this. But I know now from having done it so many times that if I don't go, I'm going to have like a ton of guilt, and it's going to create a lot of chaos for me that could be solved if I just did it. And then I wouldn't have guilt, shame, or chaos. I would have more order. And then I forced myself to go. I cried all the way there. And then I had a decent time. And by the time I got home, I was in a great mood. And again, no shame, no guilt. And so the guilt and shame, as we've talked about, we need that because it reminds us what the meaning is, what we should be pursuing, and when something is too chaotic.
Yeah. Beautiful stuff. Oh, I'm getting all excited here because there's a book that was written a few years ago, which was basically highlighting the fact that you can create opportunities for serendipity. Okay, you can create those opportunities, but what you need to do, and I feel like the image for this episode should be the image of an orchestra, because when you said harmony earlier, I mean, I literally saw an orchestra. So now imagine you walk into an orchestra when they're all tuning their instruments. Okay. What you hear is absolute chaos. Okay. Until, perhaps the lead, on that particular piece of music, the lead starts the right note, and everyone knows what we're about to play. So as soon as he hits that one note, okay, obviously with the conductor, they all sync. Okay. And some of them go quiet and some of them start playing. And the conductor, I mean, if you think about the conductor's role, we are the conductor. The conductor must be the epitome of someone acting in good faith, because he stands there waving his arms around.
The internal locus.
Internal locus of control, exactly. He stands there waving his arms around, hoping, really, if you think about it, he's hoping that everyone knows what they're doing and they're all going to follow in this. Essentially what it is resonating in harmony to serendipity. The orchestra is like and I think most complicated music is exactly this demonstration to us, which is why we love music so much, is it's a demonstration of the right people at the right time coming together and having this incredible serendipity, synchronization. I love the word simpatico. But, you look at some amazing bands in history, they were only good for a period. And then that sympathical thread left for whatever reasons. And the band doesn't exist anymore. But the music that they created was unique and incredible. And I'm just going to throw in there quickly, like, this is actually how I feel about a lot of, at the age of 50, you start, well, I'm 49 now. I keep saying I'm 50, but, it's close enough. You start understanding that this is actually life, that the person that plays the trombone with you in the orchestra yesterday, where you created this beautiful music, may not be the same person that you want to take into a jazz funk session that you've been invited to, and that's how life is. If you want to live life to the full, you need to accept those invitations and go and play the violin with the jazz funk band for a couple of years, and I think this is a part of, like, maybe it's it does actually speak a lot into the absurdism that you were talking about earlier, that you accept that some level of not chaos, but the shifting of the serendipity that you've created in your life, and you start accepting it because you realize that meeting someone in America online who I'm suddenly doing a podcast with is serendipitous, and you accept it as a positive thing, because there's all these other things that led to it. But all those other things I created. So when you look at a painting, I'll give you another very literal example just quickly. I did a painting when I was very young. I think I was 18, in a very specific style. It was a male figure floating in space, and he has these, like, they're not exactly attached, but he's got these huge sort of bat style wings coming out from behind him. It's a very fantasy style painting. Anyway, that was when I was 19. So whatever it is, decades later, I did another painting, totally unrelated, of my wife, where I didn't realize that I used almost the same style and almost the same colors. I didn't realize this until I actually put the painting up in our bedroom and I put them next to each other. So you've got two paintings almost 30 years apart that show a theme, that I was motivated to paint this figure, this male figure, when I was a young man. And I ended up painting a female figure who I'm bonded to now in midlife, in the same style. And the serendipity and the harmony in that is just visible. You just look at it and you go, oh, wow. It's very hard to put into words, but I think that's the point of art,
Right. I mean, because how many, like, threads of meaning apart is that? But if you really thought of, like, those two paintings, you could, if you really wanted to, you could probably go back and, like, trace this point to that point, like, and you would be tracing your entire life, because one tiny little thing, that's why it's important to go with the chaos, because the chaos is neutral. All right. There is no value judgment on the chaos. The chaos is a neutral agent. It's just what it is. So you don't know if the chaos is going to be fruitful or destructive. But once if you experience enough of chaos, you'll start to know how it feels when something is destructive and when something is fruitful. And you should be attuned to that. You should be really aware of the senses and trust your intuition, because otherwise you're going to keep, you'll be led astray to the destructive part of the chaos instead, which is sometimes what happens with traumatized brains, right? Because the wires are kind of crossed, so to speak, and neurons, certain sections of the brain get fired together, and then it's very confusing, like, what is pain, what is pleasure, what is safety, what is quote unquote normal. So you get conditioned to be used to this destructive chaos instead of the fruitful chaos. And that's how my brain was wired for half of my life. And I'm now rewiring it. And it's really shitty because, like, have you ever tried to, like, open up a brain and rewire it? It's confusing as fuck. So, you know, but I've just trusted my intuition. And this is kind of, I'll try not to make this too long of a story, but I think this might be a really beautiful thing to say, is the thing that inspired me to get on this path. I mean, obviously there were other things before, right? Because you can't, like, deny the different threads. But the big pivotal point for me was when I realized what meaning was. And what I realized it through was making art. When I was 22, 23, I was doing nothing. I was completely jaded, hopeless, had no goals, like no autonomy, very traumatized, didn't know what I wanted to do. But I found myself in all my laying around and doing nothing. I started making just like doodling, like digital collages on my phone on some free app. And I started doing this. And it was like when there was just nothing, there was no meaning at all. And I started doing something that was so incredibly meaningful. I really, after a few months of that, I started to realize, like, whatever this is, I need to do more of this. And I quickly realized that I was I was ordering the chaos. For me, that's what making art is. It's taking my chaos and putting it in a rectangle, right? A canvas. It could be a rectangle, a square, whatever. I go into this rectangle, just dump all my chaos in there. And the better you get at being aware of your own chaos and what the meanings and implications are, the better compositing you can do of that chaos on this canvas. And then that creates more meaning. And that's partially what inspired me to then say to myself, like, okay, what am I going to do? Am I going to drop out of college, or what am I going to do? Because I don't find meaning I was doing a couple media classes because I was thinking maybe I'll do some media studies or something like that. I was interested in journalism or whatever. I don't know. But when I was doing this art, I was just like, I don't know anything. All the meaning that I've tried to find has been just absurdity. It's been so painful and chaotic. But when I make these collages, it feels like that's what I'm supposed to be doing. So what if I just did that? And there's other factors that it's also a very beautiful story, but I can go to that at a different time. But like, that's what inspired me to actually go to art school. And it's then embracing myself as an artist that led to all these other positive changes, because I finally realized, like, I had some purpose. And I created my purpose out of my own chaos, because I was like, and arguably that's what I still do, right? Like, why are we doing this podcast? Like, why do I talk so much on Twitter or do writing or consult with parents or do anything, right? It's all because I'm ordering my own chaos, and I've become very good at it because I'm very attuned to the chaos, and now I'm rational about it mostly. So people appreciate that because they need to do the same thing, which is why we are doing TransPsyche, so that we can demonstrate how to order chaos, how to recognize it, the meaning, the positive meaning and negative meaning, and the interplay of those things. But for me, it'll always be going back to art and visual art. And of course, I recognize the same thing in music too. Like, and if I look back through all those miserable times, like, what are the times that stuck out to me besides like the trauma that was so intense, right? It's listening to me. It's the couple things that kept me hanging on: music, comedy, and art.
Creating
and my raps.
Creating order from chaos. There's all those things you just mentioned that create order from chaos. I mean, even comedy is
it completely
is a way of us taking certain topics and putting them into a way that we can, if you think about the expression of laughter, it's an expression of it's a burst of energy, and I just want to point out before we wrap up, I just want to point out that that's one of the things I think you and I gel really well on, is that understanding of the painting, of the creation. Because when you look at a blank canvas, most people see a blank canvas. You and I see opportunity. There's just this. I was in an art shop yesterday, funny enough, and I said to the person that I was with, I said, I don't want to look at too much here, because I was there for actually to buy a puzzle for my wife, but it had all these big canvases and new paints and all these other wonderful creative things, you know. And I said to her, I don't want to look at too much because I'm going to get all excited. And I think my friend did understand, but I don't think someone who isn't creative would understand that statement, you know, because I look at a blank canvas and I'm like, I have to fill this canvas with something, you know, and it might take a while. I'm not saying I'm going to like come home and like frantically paint something wonderful. It's not that simple, you know, but that's life, you know. But I want to add, when we talk about life, and our to go right back to the beginning, let's do that. Let's go back to what I said about being born at zero, you know. The analogy is not perfect, because actually I think life is more like the oil painter's palette, who has all this wet paint on the palette and it's all mixed up. And when you look at it, it doesn't do anything, but the potential's there. I mean, this is kind of what our genes are, isn't it? It's all there, but it's not on the paper, you know. The canvas, or the canvas, the canvas is life, you know. The palette is us. We have all this potential, all these colors, all this beautiful paint. I mean, I must confess, if you don't mind me going a bit off the track, one of the things I just love about art is handling paint. It's just such a beautiful medium, you know, and the colors, especially when they're wet, are just it's like food, you know, for me. So anyway, we're digressing a little bit, but you get what I'm saying. Like, I think there's that analogy that's so powerful, but you need to make that distinction that the canvas is life, is the chronology of life. You know, a painting on canvas takes time to layer and to build and to develop, you know, and it'll always be subject it'll always be subjective. It'll always be subject to the viewer, you know. But we are the palette. We bring the palette to the canvas and we bring those things together. And if you don't bring those things together, then all you've got is a messy palette. And nobody wants a messy palette. I mean, you don't walk into someone's house and they've got messy palettes lying around. No, you need the person. You need the internal locus of control to take the paintbrush and move it to the canvas, you know.
Yes, you need the
agent.
You could look at the agent, but the canvas itself is, you know, what? I mean, it's the chaos. I mean, it's all the chaos. I mean, the paint and the canvas are chaos. They're both, but it's, you know, you can look at it as a void. Like that's part of why I don't like white, as I always say. I hate white, and I hate white walls, because to me it's just like I'm staring at nothing but everything, and it drives me crazy, because I'm just so idealistic that I'm just like, what? Because when I look at a white wall, like I need to put like right where I'm facing this wall, there's nothing on it. I'm going to put something that I want to look at all the time. Because it's like, otherwise I'm staring off into this void of potential.
Endless potential.
Inside. Yeah. The void of potential can be really hurtful if you keep seeing mirages in it, right? So I don't want to look at this white wall, because it's going to start me thinking about other metaphorical white walls of the past that I don't want to think about. So if I put some funky ass art up there and behind me and all around me, you know, I purposely decorate my home with specific meaningful objects. You know, it's all very strategically placed for function and aesthetics and the meaning that it produces. And of course, I have Mr. Bone Jangles for that reason too. You know, like, what is more, like, this is a whole other thing I'll have to mention sometime, but I'm like, I could write a whole essay just about skeletons and like their use in popular culture, because they're like memento moris, right? They're, literally, and I don't like skeletons that look mean. Like, let me just say, I don't like mean looking skulls or like, quote, badass looking skulls. Like, to me, they're too aggressive. I like skulls that have a goofy ass grin on their face, because they're saying like, this is it. You better do something because
it's like a reminder
exactly.
that I had this image many years ago. So funny enough, I used to draw. I started my very creative spurt at school by copying an anatomy book. So all I drew for, I don't know, maybe 2 years, all I drew was skeletons. Very accurate.
Oh my God.
Very accurate skeletons and skulls. And I even knew where the cracks were and all these very detailed, my friends loved it. But you're quite right. None of them were evil. None of them were, I didn't mean them in an evil way, although inevitably some people always see it that way, But I remember having this image of this skeleton in me sort of smiling at me, because like you said earlier, the rest of us is chemistry and hormones and blood and skin and brain and all these other things. But when you die, what's left is your skeleton, and it's sort of like this monument to who you were, So I think it's such a powerful thing to recognize that the blank canvas, the white skeleton. I mean, even a skeleton is white. These sort of base structures that you need before you start building anything. But it's a very. I think we've achieved a very powerful deep dive into how you operationalize your agency in your own life. I think we've done that like really well, if I dare say so myself.
Well, I remember that this is just the intro to Transcendence. Yeah, it's always the intro. But I think we did cover, the points that the questions that we set out to address, and we will have, I'm sure, every episode has themes of this, but I guess I just really wanted to specify some of the philosophical stuff, and because this is like the bones of my own philosophy, because I haven't ever mentioned on this podcast the funk god philosophy. We could do a whole thing just about that, because I am going to write a book at some point about basically how I turned myself into my own god so I could have faith in myself and in something greater than myself. And it's called Funk God, and funk is like my whole philosophy, but it's largely based on some of these ideas, the absurdism and the existentialism and the radical acceptance and the skeletons and all of it, So I think this is a good place to leave it for now. I'm feeling in a nice harmonious state. So
I'm just going to say one last thing, just out of my professional training background. I hope anyone who's listened to this hasn't fixated on the way we talk about suicide, because what Laura and I are doing is very, very pro-life, pro-living, pro
skeletons. I know it's kind of
but
I guess juxtaposition, but the skeletons represent life.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And even the way we talk about God, like you said, funk God. I think I did mention in our last episode, which we're doing part 2 this next coming week. But the point that it goes back to what we were talking about, finding meaning or creating meaning. You either find meaning or you create meaning. You either accept the meaning that you discover in the world, or like Laura, you go and create funk God and you become funk God. And I totally respect that, because you've taken responsibility for your own spirituality, which is very admirable, if I can say, Laura.
Well, it's very funky to do that.
Yeah.
Takes a lot of the funk. But I'll get into that another time. But But yeah, I appreciate this conversation as always, Vincent.
Always.
Yeah. All right, guys.
Thanks,
it
guys.
for now. Thank you.
Next time.
And remember to share this and subscribe to the YouTube channel. And of course, on Twitter, we're both on Twitter quite a bit. And so if you want to engage in these ideas, we've had some people already messaging us and engaging with these ideas. And we're always interested to hear different points of view and the different meaning that you get from this or questions you have. So always feel free to reach out to either of us. And
leave it at that. Thank you.